Yo, what's going on, guys? It's X again, and we've been having some pretty good trades today. So, first of all, we started off with the Trevor Ariza trade to Miami, and then the PJ Tucker trade to the Milwaukee Bucks. But I'm not gonna say my thoughts on them yet. Rather, this is a trade line prediction video that I promised. So, this video should be up before March 25th. So, here's how I'm gonna do it, y'all. So similar to the trades video I did back in December where I talked about the offseason trades, I'm going to talk about how it could impact their team, and I'm not going to grade it like the other video, but I'm going to be talking about how these trades work out similar to Rusty Buckets and Sporting Logically when they did their trade videos. So let's dive into it. Originally I was going to do the PJ Tucker trade to Miami, but yeah, shout out the Woj bomb. That's not going to happen. And plus he got Trevor Ariza, so you know, it's whatever. The first trade I want to talk about is Rajon Rondo to the Milwaukee Bucks. Originally in this trade, I was going to include DJ Wilson with Pat Connaughton, but considering DJ Wilson got traded to Houston, obviously I had to adjust the trade. So now it's still Pat Connaughton with Rodion Kurucs and this G-Leaguer that came out of nowhere for Rajon Rondo. Even though Milwaukee's been good this season, they are currently the 3rd seed and they just beat the 76ers as I started to make this video. The issue still stands out that they needed a point guard since they gave up Malcolm Brogdon for basically Wesley Matthews, who was good for them, but he's bad for us. I mean, I'm not going to get into that. Eric Bledsoe was obviously not the answer, which is why they traded him for Drew Holiday. And Drew has been a very solid upgrade, but in my view, I think Drew works better as a 2 guard. And it didn't help that they traded DJ Augustine too, which DJ was no George Hill obviously, but he was not that bad of a backup point guard. But enough about the team. The Bucks need somebody that is not only a point guard, but one that brings a lot of championship experience. Obviously, Rondo won a chip with us last year, and he won one with the Celtics back in 2008. So he brings much needed leadership to this team. Plus, he would make their offense entirely better because him using Giannis in a pick and roll scenario would be so deadly, as he was able to do it with both Kevin Garnett and Anthony Davis. He can utilize Giannis the same way. Also, he's played with Drew Holiday before, and those two tore it up in the playoffs with the New Orleans Pelicans, especially in the first round against the Portland Trailblazers. And again, Rondo would bring much needed leadership to a relatively, I don't want to say young team, but a team that wants to win. As for why Atlanta would make this trade, so far they view, or at least from what I heard, they view the Rajon Rondo experiment as a failure. Originally, I thought he was going to Atlanta to help Trae Young with his IQ and his feel for the game. But the thing is, Rondo has not played up to expectation. So if he was on a contending team like Milwaukee, I bet you that we would see shades of both regular season and playoff Rondo when he was with us and the Pelicans. So if Atlanta were to make this trade right now, their starting lineup would be Rondo, Drew, Middleton, PJ Tucker, if he does start, and Giannis at the 5. On the Hawks side of things, well, you get 2 young players in Kurucs and that G-Leaguer, and then you get Pat Connaughton, who could be a good rotational player. The next trade I have for y'all is George Hill to the LA Clippers. So for this one, I decided to make it a 3-team deal to make the salaries match, because I know the Clippers don't want to give up Pat Bev nor Lou Will. So I made this a 3-team deal with the Toronto Raptors. OKC gets Luke Kennard and Stanley Johnson, and then that Kabengele dude. And then Toronto gets Patrick Patterson, Kendrick Williams, and Daniel Oturu. So we all know George Hill is a solid veteran, but the thing is, he's been getting passed around like a blunt-ass flight would say, and he's been on multiple teams post-Indiana. He's been with the Utah Jazz, the Sacramento Kings, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Milwaukee Bucks, and now he's with the Oklahoma City Thunder, but he has not played since January 25th with a sprained toe. But he's been having a fairly decent season, scoring nearly 12 points a game on really good efficiency actually. He's shooting 51% from the field, 39% from 3, and 84% from the free throw line. And it's fitting that he's on a team that's ready to compete, and the LA Clippers have expressed interest in the 35-year-old point guard. So the Clippers, even going back to last year when they were expected to win it all, have struggled with a lack of playmaking. While George Hill may not be the guy that gets you like 10 assists a game, he's still a really solid distributor and a really solid ball handler to pair alongside, of course, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. Also, he's best friends with Paul George, and they play together in Indiana. So that would help the Clippers' chemistry a lot. Plus, he adds more to what is already considered good Clipper defense with Serge Ibaka, Pat Beverly, Paul George, Kawhi, and Marcus Morris. So George Hill would be another weapon, or at least another two-way weapon that the Clippers need. But like I said, George Hill brings some playmaking and being another ball handler for this Clipper team. I literally explained why OKC would make this trade as well as the LA Clippers making this trade, but I'm going to explain it anyway. OKC gets a good shooter in Luke Kennard, who's a good rotational player, and then Stanley Johnson and then that other guy are there to help the salaries match, and then Toronto gets back Patrick Patterson. Now, some of y'all are going to make the argument that, well, they're going to lose some depth because you're trading 4 players for basically George Hill. Well, here's the thing. Those 4 players have not played much. Luke Kennard got a $64 million contract, and he's barely played at all in recent games. And Patrick Patterson, well, again, barely plays at all. And the 2 rookies could be useful elsewhere. Plus, they got Nicholas Batum, so who cares? So overall, LA should make this trade happen. The next trade I have for you guys is Jeremy Grant to the Dallas Mavericks. Originally, this trade package was going to include Josh Richardson and Dorian Finney-Smith, but considering these two have been very valuable to the Mavericks all season, I decided to go a different route with this trade. So this particular trade involves James Johnson and Trey Burke. So far, the Mavs have looked more like an in-sync team, and they've been playing much better basketball as of late, but I still do think that Dallas could use a solid third option. And I feel like Jeremy Grant would fit that role with the season he's been having. He's been averaging 23 points a game on pretty solid enough efficiency, shooting 43% from the field, 35% from 3, and 87% from the free throw line. But my main issue with this Dallas team, though, is them not having a good enough small forward. Now, that's no insult to Dorian Finney-Smith. He's a solid 3-and-D guy. Josh Richardson is a decent guy at the 3, but he's more of a 2-guard. And James Johnson, well, he barely gets any playing time. So why not use an upgrade at the small forward who can not only put the ball on the deck, but can space the floor and defend at a high level? And you put Josh Richardson back at the 2. Now, I was kind of thinking about this shit, bro, and I was like, man, what is Jeremy Grant's role going to be? Is he going to be the same role he was in Denver and OKC, or will he be actually used as a third option like I wanted, or at least I projected him to be? But I still do believe Jeremy Grant will be a nice addition to this Dallas Maverick team. In regards to why the Pistons would make this deal, well, Jeremy Grant's pulling a Marcus Morris, meaning that he's averaging a career high in points. Arguably, he could have been an all-star, but mostly he's putting those type of stats up to prove his trade value, that he's more than just a spot-up 3-and-D guy that's averaging 12 points. Rather, he's proven himself to be a solid third or even fourth option on a contending team. But in this instance, considering he'll be playing next to Luka and Porzingis, he'll be a solid third option. So this next trade seems like a random person, but it's enough that my video already has random people to random teams, so why not use it for this one? This one is Gorgui Dieng to the Dallas Mavericks. This trade would involve Dwight Powell, Wes Iwundu, and considering how ESPN doesn't do first round, second round picks, probably a pick gonna be thrown in there too, in exchange to get Gorgui Dieng. More recently, Gorgui Dieng has been involved in trade rumors. He is currently averaging 8 points and 4.5 rebounds, but the thing that stands out with him is that he is a pretty good defender, which is something that this Dallas team needs, considering that they're not as good of a defensive team, even with Josh Richardson, Dorian Finney-Smith, but most especially, their front court is not as good defensively. Like, Dwight Powell's alright, Willie Cauley-Stein's pretty decent for what he is, but again, not that great. As much as I'm for the Boban hype train, Boban is very slow-footed, and he's a decent rebounder, decent shot blocker, but again, very slow-footed. And while Kristaps does have a hype for a center, he's not that great of a defender. He's more of an empty shot blocker type of center, if you know what I mean. And I still consider him a power forward. Maxi Kleber is a power forward. He is not a center. While Gorgui Dieng may not be the most well-known name, nor a name that would stick out to the Mavs' interest, I do think he would be a really good fit next to Luka and Porzingis, because Dieng is a reliable defender and he has a reliable jump shot. And plus, depending on what Rick Carlisle wants to do, I think he'd be a great energy guy off the bench, and he would help put the Mavs in the right direction in terms of their defense in the front court, because come playoff time, you could use a guy like Gorgui Dieng to play next to Luka and Porzingis, both of whom are not great defenders. He can actually help the Mavs on that end. Now, this trade, I think, makes sense for them, but again, a lot of people don't know who Gorgui Dieng is, and a lot of people know him because he's gotten into heated scuffles with like Devin Booker and Gerald Green. But again, defense, toughness, and good floor spacing, and he can play next to Porzingis in the front court. Now, on the Memphis Grizzlies side of things, you get a young player in Wes Iwundu who has a lot of upside, and then you get a decent replacement for Gorgui Dieng and Dwight Powell. Now, this is another trade that's going to involve two players going to the same team, but bear with me here. These trades do make sense in my head. So, the first one I'm going to talk about is Alec Burks to Denver, and then the second one I'll talk about is Josh Jackson to Denver. The first trade I want to talk about is the Alec Burks trade. This trade involves him and Reggie Bullock, who is a good three-point shooter, but is there to fill out the salaries in exchange for Will Barton. Now, the Denver Nuggets have not been horrible this year, but the problem with them is the lack of consistency and the lack of good defense and good depth. Alec Burks is a pretty good defender, and also he is a good shot creator and good shooter off the bench. He can play next to Monte Morris and Facu. Now, I was thinking about this trade while looking at their stats, and both their stats are pretty even. Will Barton is averaging 13 points a game, or exactly 12.7, and both of them have been shooting around 40% from the field. Will Barton has been averaging 44% from the field, and Alec Burks 41%. But I think the difference here is, y'all, is that Alec Burks is a much better defender. Not only that, he's a much better player and decision maker than Will Barton, because a video pointed this out that his assist to turnover ratio last year was 2.1. While he may not be a pass first point guard, he's definitely a combo guard that does make good decisions and can get you some timely buckets and can play some really good defense on top of it. Now, that's not necessarily a knock on Will Barton. I do think Will Barton is a really good player, but I think Alec Burks would be a much better upgrade, and I think he'll pair well with Jokic and Paul Millsap. As for why the Knicks would make this trade, Alec Burks is on a one-year deal, meaning his contract is tradable, and you get a decent replacement in Will Barton. As for the Josh Jackson deal, this involves Zeke Naji and Victor Konkar. Now, as I said with Alec Burks, this team has struggled on the defensive end, and that's mainly because they let Torrey Craig go and Jeremy Grant go, two defensive pieces that were really vital to the Nuggets' run to the conference finals. And after those two walked in free agency, Denver has not been as good on the defensive end. Currently, they are ranked 14th in defensive efficiency, and I think Josh Jackson, while he may not make the biggest difference, I think he'll help out this Denver defense really well. So far, Josh Jackson is proving to be a pretty solid role player on the Pistons. He is currently averaging 13.4 a game, and his efficiency is not that great, especially considering he's shooting 28% from 3 off 4 attempts, but he's shooting 42% from the field off 11 attempts. The most noted thing about him ever since coming into the NBA was his defense. While his defense was kind of mediocre in Phoenix and it was alright in Memphis, Josh Jackson has really turned it around in Detroit, and mostly because he is more focused on the game. Because remember, when focused, Josh Jackson is a really solid defender at the 3. And if Denver does trade for him, he'll have that same role that Jeremy Grant had when he was with the Denver Nuggets. Also, he can be a starting forward next to Michael Porter Jr., who has been inserted to the starting lineup more recently because Paul Millsap's getting old and Gary Harris has kind of been a hit and miss player recently. And again, Josh Jackson can fix some holes that the Denver Nuggets have defensively. As for why Detroit would make this trade, well, similar to Alec Burks and the Knicks, Josh Jackson is on a tradable contract, and you can flip him for some young players with a lot of potential. So the second and last trade I want to talk about is Aaron Gordon to the Boston Celtics. This trade will involve Tristan Thompson, Aaron Nesmith, and Carson Edwards to the Orlando Magic. The Boston Celtics get Aaron Gordon. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the Boston Celtics because I made a video about why they are really frustrating to watch. And I already explained the problems I have with putting Daniel Tice and Tristan Thompson in the same front court at the same time. So to keep it short, Boston gets a really good stretch 4 who can pair next to both Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and somewhat of Kemba Walker. But you also get a guy that can defend and get you buckets when need be. And the Magic have not been trending in the right direction, especially with Jonathan Isaac out. But I think they're looking to not only move Gordon, but they might move Nikola Vucevic as well. So why not move Aaron Gordon to a actual contender? Originally, when talking about a trade idea for Aaron Gordon, I honestly thought the Phoenix Suns would be a good fit, which it would be. But the Phoenix Suns don't really need him because you already have Devin Booker and Chris Paul, and Aaron Gordon would be a decent third option, but I don't think they really need a third option. But Boston needs a guy that can get you buckets, can hit threes, and defend at a high level, and that's what I see in Aaron Gordon. And I think if Boston trades for Aaron Gordon, I am putting him in the starting lineup next to either Daniel Tice or Robert Williams. As for why the Magic would make this trade, they get two young promising players in Nesmith and Edwards. Also, you get rid of Gordon's contract, which expires not this year but next year. And assuming Vucevic leaves or gets traded as well, you still can build around Markelle Fultz and Jonathan Isaac. And Gordon is still 25 years old. So he may not be a young player, but he's still a player that has a lot of untapped potential. And if you put him on a good team like the Boston Celtics, I guarantee you guys, Aaron Gordon's strengths will be maximized with his weaknesses being minimized. While Aaron Gordon is not a superstar player as he was expected to be, he's still a good enough player to be on a contending team. So this video is long enough as is, so I'm not going to go into too much trades, even though I have some written down on my paper right here. Those are going to be honorable mentions for the end of the video, but I will end it with this last one here. And it's LaMarcus Aldridge going back to the Portland Trail Blazers. This trade will involve three players: Rodney Hood, Derrick Jones Jr., and Zach Collins. Now, I ain't going to talk too much about the Portland Trail Blazers because I already made a video about them and I discussed how good they are. But I want to talk about mostly LaMarcus Aldridge. So since March 1st, LaMarcus has not played a game for the San Antonio Spurs since. And the front office and Greg Popovich have came out and said that, yeah, this is going to be LaMarcus's last game as a San Antonio Spur. And I'm just assuming, I don't know if this is exactly true, but based on reports, it should be. LaMarcus wants to play on a contending team. Now, Portland will not be the first team in mind, but I think it feels right for him to play with Damian Lillard again, as well as alongside a much improved CJ McCollum. It feels right for the culture, not only for the NBA, but for the Blazers culture as well, because he spent his first 9 seasons there. But even after that, I was still kind of skeptic about this trade, you feel me? Because LaMarcus, he's not known to be a good defender, and he's having arguably the worst season of his career statistically. While 13 points is not bad for his age, the defense would definitely be a problem because it's enough that they don't have good defensive players in the front court, you know what I'm saying? And LaMarcus will definitely not help the issue there, but in terms of like his offensive production, I think he'd be a really good fit next to Nurkic, as well as being a reliable pick and pop partner next to Dame and CJ. However, the only downside to that is you're trading away 3 players, 3 of them who actually been pretty valuable to the Blazers, just to get LaMarcus Aldridge. But again, this is more like for the culture type of thing, because like I said, LaMarcus has spent nearly a decade with the Blazers, but I can see why they would halt this trade or hell, not even be interested in getting Aldridge. Now on the Spurs side of things, I can see why they don't want to make this trade, because they do have a track record of not wanting to trade players to rival Western Conference teams. But on the bright side of things, you get 2 young players in Derrick Jones Jr. and Zach Collins, and even though Zach Collins has been a bit injury prone, he is a very serviceable big man who can play solid defense and can hit the occasional 3. And Derrick Jones Jr. is a really athletic young role player for this team, and he could fit the Spurs culture really well. But again, I can see why the Spurs would not want to make this trade, nor the Blazers agreeing with it. But like I said multiple times, these are trades that make sense to me. It's not like based on some factual reports from like Woj or Shams or something like that. But one last thing before I go, I forgot to give some honorable mentions. There are players that I did not talk about, like JJ Redick, Eric Gordon, Victor Oladipo, but I'll talk quickly about where those particular players are going to end up. Eric Gordon, I'm not too sure. Victor Oladipo to the Warriors because they need someone to pair with Steph Curry because Kelly Oubre is inconsistent. JJ Redick, I say the Mavs or Nuggets or Suns, because for the Mavs case, they could use a shooter to pair next to Luka, and he'll be given the Seth Curry role that the Dallas Mavs gave him. Both those teams could use a consistent shooter, but for the Nuggets case, they have too many guards on that team. I think the Suns would be the best option for Redick in this scenario if I had to choose between those two teams, because he'll pair next to Dario Saric off the bench, and he's played with Chris Paul before, so that's instant chemistry right there. And just like CP3, JJ Redick can bring a lot of leadership and experience to this young team. But yeah, that is basically all the trades I will talk about, and if none of these trades end up happening, you can feel free to give me Donkey of the Day or whatever the hell. But bro, I am praying before March 25th that one of these trades will come to reality. If they don't, well, that's too bad. But anyways, like and subscribe if you really enjoy my content. And yeah, that's the end of the video. I'm X. Deuces.